Y'all have some strong feelings about HOAs, and this is something that I get comments about all the time here on YouTube, and that is about how much people hate HOAs and how they will never, ever, ever live in a neighborhood that has one. You tell me all the time. People are very passionate about this subject, and I didn't realize the passion behind it until we started making these videos and talking to so many of you from across the country. And from what I've been able to find out from talking to so many clients, definitely understand where you're coming from, and there are a lot of misconceptions about what HOAs are like here in the state of Georgia. So even though I get those comments about people that are refusing to live in an HOA, that if you do that altogether, that's going to severely limit your options here in the North Georgia area. Hi, I'm Sarah Mislowski with KeyPoint Homes Group, and my team and I help people from all over the country relocate right here to Georgia. Now, usually right off the bat, one of the first phone calls that we have in meetings, we will discuss and we will have that conversation with you about what your feelings are like about living in an HOA community. Most of the times you'll tell us before we even get a chance to have that conversation. So since this is such a big topic that so many of you mentioned, let's talk about it here. Well, for starters, let's talk about the positives that come with living in an HOA community. In the state of Georgia, roughly 2.3 million people live in HOA communities. That is 34% of Georgia homeowners that are part of an HOA. Now, these stats look at Georgia as the whole, which obviously includes Middle and South Georgia, where it's a lot more common to find a home that is not in an HOA. I grew up in South Georgia, and at that time, there were hardly any planned communities that had an HOA, much less swim tennis communities. And then we would come visit, or my grandparents had a community that had a swim tennis team. And y'all, it was my dream to one day live in a swim tennis community, and I so desperately wanted as a child to be a part of that swim team. Fun fact, in South Georgia, they just didn't have those kinds of things, and they don't really have that swim team in the neighborhood type feel. But I digress. Back to the positives of being in an HOA. When we take a look at how many people are part of an HOA, that is including people down in Middle and South Georgia, but there's not a whole lot of HOAs down there. But what I will say, though, if we're kind of thinking about that and thinking about what percentage of people probably live in an HOA here in the North Metro Atlanta area, or the Metro Atlanta area, we are definitely close to 50%, if not higher than that. So having an HOA is very common in a lot of the towns that we service and talk about here on this channel, like Buford, Sugar Hill, Alpharetta, Johns Creek, and on and on and on. The reason for this is that HOAs allow the neighborhoods to retain their value, and initially, often, homes in a neighborhood with an HOA are going to sell for more than a home that's not in a neighborhood with an HOA. The whole point of that homeowners association is to set up guidelines and rules for how to maintain your home and the neighborhood amenities that that neighborhood is going to offer. Depending on how strict your HOA is, they may limit things like what color you can paint your house, whether or not you are able to build a fence, and if so, what color and kind and material it needs to be made out of. Most oftentimes, they're not going to allow you to park a boat in your front yard or sometimes even in your driveway. Definitely not a camper in your driveway. And a lot of them have restrictions on the types of cars that can be parked on the street and in your driveway. For example, a common thing here is that if you drive a work truck, think something that is wrapped with advertisements or naming and branding, they will often require you to park that car in your garage. The money paid to your homeowners association also goes towards maintaining the community grounds, like the front entrance of neighborhoods. There's always lots of really, really pretty flowers, and it looks so welcoming and inviting. Fees go to cover the entrance to the neighborhood, as well as any neighborhood amenities like sidewalks and street lamps and swim and tennis, all those things. If you have a neighborhood playground, it's going to cover that as well. This money is being used to maintain, pay for the maintenance of those, new equipment, and the list goes on. You'll find that these towns that I mentioned in earlier predominantly have HOAs because of these parameters. They help keep the area well maintained. They help keep those property values up. Many people who choose places like Alpharetta or Johns Creek have had to pay a significant price to live in these areas, and they have no problem with these restrictions because they know it is going to keep their property values high. If you're going to spend $750,000 on a home, you're going to want to make sure that it maintains its value, and you aren't going to want your neighbor painting their house purple. or if your neighbor hasn't mowed their grass in 2 years and parks all their cars in the front lawn and they have a camper in the driveway, that's definitely going to affect the value of your home. This isn't to say that if a neighborhood doesn't have an HOA that everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket, but you aren't going to have any rules or anything to enforce or fall back on if your neighbor does decide to do something. You are counting on your neighbor to be a good neighbor and not do those things. All right, so one of the major turnoffs for people who have lived in states like Florida are how strict HOAs have been in their experience. Now, based on the stories that we have from our clients who have relocated from places like Florida, I think it's fair to say, and we often will ask where they're moving from, and we're like, whoa, wait, let's talk about HOAs here. But it's fair to say that you're gonna find that many HOAs here tend to be much more lenient than the HOAs down in Florida. And we've also found a major difference in the price of HOAs here compared to Florida. Here in North Georgia, if you live in a community with a price point of around $500,000 or so, you can expect that your HOA for the year is probably going to be somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for the year. Of course, if you are living in a gated community or a golf course community with a country club, you're going to expect to pay significantly higher than that. It's not going to be nearly as much as what we have experienced our Florida clients having to pay. Recently, we had a Florida resident comment on a video that the cost of the HOA down in Florida, that the yearly fee was the exact same as the monthly fee that it was down in Florida. That is an insane price difference across the board right there. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is that if you are living in a 55 plus community or retirement community in Florida, obviously those costs are much higher, and you're also going to experience a much higher HOA if you're living in a community like that that has a much more greater level of amenities that they are providing. So aside from the obvious price that is associated with living in an HOA community, why would you choose not to live in an HOA community? Well, many people state that the reason that they don't want to live in one is simply because they don't want to be told what to do. And it definitely does vary on how strict neighborhoods can be. Like I said, in some communities, you'll get a letter in your mailbox if you don't roll your trash can back in a timely manner on trash day, or if you hadn't cut your grass in 2 weeks or so, you're gonna get a letter in your mailbox. They also kind of police things like fading paint on your shutters, those kind of things. Now, to some homeowners, they don't want to be told what to do or how to live, and they obviously don't want to be told how to maintain their home. Kind of like the feeling of, I paid all of this money for my house, I pay money, I pay property taxes. Who are you to tell me when I have to paint my front door or my shutters and how often I have to cut my grass? No, thank you. But there are plenty of HOA communities, however, that don't have such extreme guidelines and are basically there just to kind of make sure that your neighbor doesn't paint their house purple or doesn't park the 10 cars in the front yard. I'm sure everyone could agree that they don't want that kind of neighbor. One viewer commented that their parents lived in Florida and that the HOA doesn't allow kids to play with a beach ball at the community pool. Obviously, that's on the stricter end of things, and most likely probably in a 55 plus community, but some people love these strict guidelines and fully support their rules. One of the biggest reasons that people cite not to live in an HOA is because they want to have livestock or animals at their house. Now, this is a big deal because you are not going to find a neighborhood with an HOA that will allow you to have chickens. This is a common question that we get all the time. So if you have your heart set on having some, this is a massive parameter that you're going to have to use in your home search and exclude all the neighborhoods that have an HOA. Another thing that you want to note is that even if you don't live in an HOA community, this can still be regulated by the town or the county that you live in. For example, in Hall County, where Flowery Branch is and Gainesville is located, you can only have 6 livestock animals that are allowed on your property, even if you have several acres of your own land not in a subdivision. Obviously, this is something that you're going to want to do your own research on and keep in mind while you are searching for a home in the area that you want to live. We recently had clients who were trying to purchase a home and wanted to have chickens and baby goats, cute little baby goats, and they found a house in a non-HOA neighborhood in Flowery Branch that would have worked well for the most part, but they did not want to be limited by the number of chickens they could have, so they reconsidered their search area, and we are now looking at a completely different area that has much more open rules. Again, this varies, and it is something that you are going to want to check into and do some research in, especially if you are looking to have baby chickens or baby goats that eventually turn into big chickens and big goats. One thing that you are going to want to keep in consideration is that if you are looking for a new construction home, predominantly almost 80 to 90% of new construction homes are going to be in a neighborhood with an HOA. Occasionally you will find a builder that has bought a piece of land and they built 2 or 3 homes together, sometimes a little bit more, that's not part of an HOA and it's not in a neighborhood. However, that is something to keep in mind, that if you are on the hunt for a new construction house, you're more than likely going to find yourself in a neighborhood with an HOA. So what do you think about HOA communities? I know you have thoughts and feelings about this. Leave a comment for me. I would love to know what you are currently paying in your state, wherever you live, for an HOA fee. We'd love to get that feedback. In the meantime, you have to check out these 2 videos of great neighborhoods in both Suwanee and Gainesville. Check it out and let me know what you think.